Hello, word nerds. Welcome to the ad for my podcast called The Dictionary. My name is Spencer Parks. I host this podcast. I read the dictionary, the words, the definitions, etymologies, even more. I talk about it. I try to explain things. I also sometimes try to put in some silly jokes or silly sing-songy things. You know, it's just a fun way to read the dictionary. Sometimes I have guests on, and I hope that you will turn on this podcast, check it out, start from the beginning, and, enjoy this, what I like to call edutainment. Check it out in all the places that you can find podcasts.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never filmed, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
And my name is Daniel Kaka.
What are we talking about today, Dan?
We are talking about a subject that I believe you are very familiar with. And it is a subject that most of us, at least people our age, kind of grew up with. And that is Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I do want to preface this right in the beginning here because the request that we were given was the Sam Raimi Spider-Man 4.
Yes, and we've already talked about a separate Spider-Man project on here.
Yes, we did. I will kind of briefly go over that just because I think it's a good setup for where we go along in this journey.
Okay.
I will be talking about Spider-Man 4 and just kind of the story that's behind it. The problem that I ran into was that there was no script for it. There was a supposed treatment that Sam Raimi had written. And I read through that treatment, and it didn't seem real.
Oh, interesting. I
couldn't verify that he actually wrote this. I didn't really want to go down that road of just hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Actually, I will state this now, just because it's kind of part of the story, but it's not really part of the story. There was a fan-made Spider-Man 4 script where a bunch of these Spider-Man fans got together on Discord. They were looking up any and all information that they could all about the unmade Sam Raimi Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And together, they actually wrote a script, like a full movie script that was compiled together. You can read it if you want to. It's available online. I originally was planning on summarizing that script, but I didn't feel that it was in the nature of what this podcast is about.
Yeah, we try to get a little bit more official, quote unquote.
As far as my notes goes, I like to give context about a property and just kind of why the decisions that were made for the Spider-Man franchise, specifically the theatrical Spider-Man franchise. So I veered away from just Spider-Man 4 and just found so much information about just Sony owning Spider-Man. There's just a wealth of information that's just in that subject alone. And that's why instead of calling this episode the Unmade Sam Raimi Spider-Man 4, I'm going to call this The Curse of Spider-Man.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, my back!
So before we get into it, though, I feel like we need to address your recent history with Spider-Man and just kind of Marvel in general, because from the last time that we talked about Spider-Man, I feel like your understanding of Spider-Man has vastly changed since then.
Yeah, absolutely. Because over the past year, I have been getting into comics and reading lots of Marvel comics. I have been going through, there's a great podcast called My Marvelous Year that talks about the best and most important stories of Marvel comics from each publishing year. I'm like up to 79 of listening to that podcast and reading all about all the comics they've talked about. And I've read some like other random Spider-Man stuff as well along the years. The Amazing Spider-Man original run, which started in 1963 and went on for almost 500 issues that ended in 1998. I have read 83 of those comics, all the way up to Amazing Spider-Man 180, which was from 1978. So I've read over half of the Spider-Man stories from the first 15 years of Amazing Spider-Man.
Wow.
You know, with a lot of these early comics, there's not really a need to read them all because there's a lot of just like one-off, you know, we're going to go fight Wheelman or whatever. I don't remember if he's Wheelman, but there's a villain who's literally, his whole thing is he's just in a giant wheel.
Hey, Batman had Condiment King. And his whole thing was just condiments.
Yeah. My favorite Marvel villain of like Silver Age Marvel villain is Paste Pot Pete, who's just a guy with a pot of paste. He just throws glue on things. That's his whole deal. And he's incredible. I love him so much.
Have I shown you my book? It's called The Most Regrettable Supervillains.
No.
It has like an index of just the worst supervillains that have been used in comic books. It's a companion to the first one, which was the most regrettable superheroes. But I got the supervillains because that one's a lot of fun to go through.
Does it have Stiltman?
I would have to look through it.
Stiltman is another classic, terrible Marvel villain. He's just a guy on stilts.
I like it.
Of the Spider-Man stuff I've read, that has included some big, important Spider-Man stuff. You know, a lot of the Green Goblin saga is in there. The famous Death of Gwen Stacy is, I believe, issue 121. There's a lot of Sinister Six and like a bunch of stuff with Dr. Octopus, including I read the comic where Doc Ock was about to marry Aunt May, which was just wild. Stuff with Kingpin, stuff with Morbius, the Six-Armed Spider-Man saga. That was a weird one.
Oh, yeah. They even put that into the animated series, too. I remember that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was like one episode I can remember where like he just got this mutation. I think they lined it up with like a few of the Morbius and Blade episodes, but like it was leading into there where he had this experimental drug where he was trying to get rid of the spider DNA and it ended up enhancing it and it gave him 2 more arms on each side.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly how the comic story goes as well. I don't know if this is how it happened in the show, but in the comics, he solves this problem. There was something to do with Morbius. I don't even remember now. Comics are weird, man.
Yeah.
Some of the stories, though, that I haven't gotten to anything with Venom yet or any of like that side of Spider-Man, Venom or Carnage or anything like that.
I mean, Venom was way down the line. He didn't start until, I think, late 80s, early 90s. I have it somewhere in my notes, but like it was much later in the game.
As far as modern Spider-Man stuff, I've also been like reading some modern stuff and I've pretty much read just about everything in like the Spider-Verse saga, the many Spider-Verse events that have happened. I've read pretty much all of those now, but I know those were all published probably at least a little well after most of the events we're talking about will have taken place.
Yes.
I also have started to read Ultimate Spider-Man, which is really interesting. Yeah, the Ultimate Universe is really interesting because it was like a Marvel reboot, but without stopping 616. A lot of the ideas that came from the Ultimate Universe get folded into the 616 timeline. Miles Morales was originally introduced in the Ultimate Universe. But it's interesting because a lot of movies actually take from the Ultimate Marvel comics stories more than like Marvel 616, especially a lot of like modern MCU stuff. The way that Tony Stark acts and Iron Man is so much more similar to like Ultimate Tony Stark, or a lot of Spider-Man stuff gets more inspired by Ultimate Spider-Man than 616 Spider-Man, because 616 Spider-Man, Peter Parker graduates high school in like issue 50 or something like that. He's not like an eternal high school kid in the way that we think of him.
Yeah.
The Ultimate Universe, I know, keeps him in high school for a lot longer. I'm like 30 or 40 issues into Ultimate Spider-Man.
Now with Ultimate, like I remember when we went over the Iron Man episode, it seemed like a lot of what was going on in the comics started to get inspired by what was happening in the MCU and in the films.
Yeah.
For example, like Jarvis was always just Tony's butler up until the movie came out and it turned into his AI assistant. When did Ultimate start? Was that?
The Ultimate Universe started in like 2000 or 2001 or something like that.
Okay.
There's like 800 comics in the entire Ultimate Universe. It ended with the Secret Wars event in 2012 or something like that. Man, there's probably going to be some comic nerds that are like really going to be getting mad at me, but I'm like still a newbie in my comic knowledge, but I've definitely built up a lot more than I had a year ago.
Yeah.
Ultimate, there was like a couple of different series, Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate Spider-Man. There was the Ultimates, which was their version of the Avengers, essentially. That's where like Black Nick Fury was in the Ultimate Universe, and that's the version that they decided to put in the MCU.
Wasn't it that the artist asked Sam Jackson if it was okay to use his likeness and image in the comics, and the only thing that he agreed to was like, well, if they make a movie, I've got to be cast in it.
Yes, yeah. That's definitely the story I heard as well.
Yeah, let's start getting into the notes, but before we get into the notes, let's get caught up in the webs of these advertisements. And we are back. We are revisiting Spider-Man, but not to go through the comic book history of Spider-Man again. If you would like to do that, you can just listen to the James Cameron Spider-Man episode in which we accuse Stan Lee of stealing the idea from Ditko. I think so.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, Stan Lee was the writer, Steve Ditko was the artist. I've learned some interesting things about Steve Ditko since then as well, but maybe we shouldn't get into all that.
Yeah. We're not going to focus in on that, but we are going to focus on the licensing rights Marvel had to deal with when trying to make a Spider-Man film. We're also going to get a better sense of why Sony still has the rights to Spider-Man, even though Disney owns Marvel Studios.
Yeah. And
we're going to explore the what could have beens in the franchise and the nightmare it is to upkeep this fragile yet profitable property. So we're going to start kind of in a familiar area. I know we touched on this in the James Cameron episode, but I think this is a good launching point. In 1985, Canon Films had bought the rights to Spider-Man under the agreement if that they were unable to release a Spider-Man movie within 5 years, the rights would then revert back to Marvel, and then they could resell their IP. Canon's business model was to make films cheap, and it did not work when it came to superhero properties, especially in the case of Superman 4, The Quest for Peace.
I'm going to do what our governments have been unwilling or unable to do. Effective immediately, I'm going to rid our planet of all nuclear weapons.
The film looked awful and did terrible in the box office. On top of that, Canon Films as a company was running into many financial problems, and for Spider-Man, it had no chance of getting produced. In April of 1990, the rights reverted back to Marvel. The rights were then sold to Golan and Globus Productions, more specifically, producer Menahem Golan. Now, his production company previously purchased Canon Films, and then he ran that company up until 1990. So in a way, he kind of left Canon and took Spider-Man with him. Now, under his direction, he hired Tobey Hooper to direct his Spider-Man movie with Leslie Stevens to write, and he greatly misunderstood the assignment. So in his script, Peter Parker turns into a humanoid tarantula monster. So Stan Lee stepped in and had former Canon film writers Ted Newsom and John Brancato develop a new script. This was more in line with the comics. In this version, Peter Parker was a student of Otto Octavius. During a cyclotron accident, the two became Spider-Man and Doc Ock. Now, for casting, they considered Tom Cruise as Peter Parker and Bob Hoskins as Doc Ock. And then Lauren Bacall and Katharine Hepburn were being considered for Aunt May, and Stan Lee would play J. Jonah Jameson.
Apparently, that's a thing where J. Jonah Jameson was specifically drawn based off of Stan Lee.
Yeah.
And was like sort of based off of Stan Lee in a lot of ways.
You know who J. Jonah Jameson was?
Who was it?
He was me.
Really?
He was irascible. He was bad-tempered. He was dumb. He thought he was better than he was. He was the version that so many people had of me anyway.
Right.
Seeing younger photos of Stan Lee, like, that makes complete sense. And especially in like the way that he speaks, like you can definitely see him embodying that.
Yeah.
The film fell apart because of budget restraints. The production was estimated to cost anywhere from $15 to $20 million, but Golan capped the production at $10 million, which was a similar fate to Spider-Man 4. Now, the only difference is that they produced Spider-Man 4 on a budget, and that budget was cut in half, and the movie failed spectacularly. So in this case, the director, Joseph Zitko, just left the production, and the whole thing just fell apart. In 1993, the rights to Spider-Man were auctioned off in 3 ways from 21st Century Film Corporation while Golan was CEO. Golan went from Canon Films to his own production company to running 21st Century Film for a little bit in the 90s. Now, Viacom, they were given the TV rights to Spider-Man. Sony Columbia, they were given the home video rights. And Carol Co. got the coveted theatrical rights. This is where James Cameron enters the picture and pitches his story with the script that we already covered. The movie was canceled after Golan sued Carol Co. for not involving him in the production. Now, Fox tried to obtain the rights after Cameron finished making True Lies for them, but they were unsuccessful. By 1995, MGM acquired 21st Century Film, which gave MGM access to the previous Spider-Man scripts and the paperwork of the previous deals. Now, MGM proceeded to sue Viacom, Sony Pictures, and Marvel, accusing them of fraud from their deal with Golan. Following the lawsuits, Carol Co. filed for bankruptcy, and they eventually became defunct by 1995. Marvel filed for bankruptcy in 1996, and 21st Century Film Corporation filed for bankruptcy in 1998. Now, making a superhero movie wasn't desirable to film studios during the late 90s. When Carol Co. took on Spider-Man, they saw themselves as a competitor to the successful Batman franchise Tim Burton and WB established based on a comic book character. But after the release of Batman and Robin in 1997, no one thought it would be worth trying to make another movie based on a comic book character. They were looked at as a big budget kids movie. By 1998, Marvel was recovering from their bankruptcy and working to make their way back into the movie industry. Now, the movie Blade proved that comic book movies could be made well, and they just sold the licensing rights to Fox to develop an X-Men movie. Also, around this time, the rights to Spider-Man reverted back to Marvel from Golan. Now, over at Sony Entertainment, President and COO John Calley was hoping to start a franchise with the studio. After the failure of Godzilla, he looked into pursuing 007. Sony had obtained the rights to the novel Casino Royale. Now, MGM then sued Sony over the rights to 007, and in exchange, in the lawsuit, they obtained the rights to Spider-Man, which was then finalized in March 1999. Sony bought the rights to Marvel for $7 million, with Marvel retaining 5% of the profits and 50% of the merchandising. For every movie that Sony made, they would have to pay $10 million to Marvel every time that they made a Spider-Man movie. And then on top of this, they would have to make a Spider-Man movie every 5 years. Otherwise, the rights would revert back to Marvel. I actually found the contract, and this is the exact wording from it. It says, Sony must commence production of a new Spider-Man film within 3 years, 9 months, and release it within 5 years and 9 months after the release of the preceding picture. So whenever there's a new Spider-Man movie that comes out in theaters, there's already a ticking clock going down for Sony to basically like make a new Spider-Man movie. And that's why it seems like we've been bombarded with so many Spider-Man movies within the past 20 years.
The biggest gap would have been between Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man 3. And yeah, that's 5 years.
Yeah.
Between the release of those two movies. Wow.
Yeah. Right away, Sony began development on Spider-Man. They were given the James Cameron script, but they passed on pursuing it and wanted to start from scratch. Sony then looked into directors who would really give the franchise a strong beginning. They considered Roland Emmerich, who just came off of doing Godzilla. They considered Tony Scott, Chris Columbus, Barry Sonnenfeld, Tim Burton, Michael Bay, Ang Lee, David Fincher, Jean de Bont, and M. Night Shyamalan. Now, David Fincher agreed to direct Spider-Man, but he didn't want to make an origin story, but he instead wanted to base the film on the storyline the night Gwen Stacy died.
Right off the bat, I'm like, oh, it sounds like David Fincher actually read a comic and cares about adapting a comic story, which sounds like something that is pretty rare for any of these superhero adaptations at the time.
Yeah. Essentially, like, Sony turned him down. And they're like, we need an origin story in order to begin this.
Yeah.
We can do the death of Gwen Stacy much later.
I think I totally get the studio's decision to want to make an origin story, especially at this time before we'd already seen Spider-Man's origin 100 times.
Yeah.
But I really like the idea of David Fincher just coming in and being like, I want it to just be about this classic Gwen Stacy storyline. That's one of the things with comics is there's so many stories that are half interesting. And so it makes sense that there's so many movies that take bits and pieces from different storylines and kind of mashes them together into something that is cohesive and interesting all throughout. There are bits and pieces of Spider-Man's origin that are more interesting or less interesting. I mean, one of the big things that the Ultimate Universe changes that also applies to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man is that the spider that bites Peter Parker is tied to Oscorp from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And is tied to the Green Goblin story from the very beginning, which is something that is like not present in the comics. Norman Osborn isn't a character for like 20 issues or something like that.
Oh, wow.
The Green Goblin's first appearance is issue 17. They don't even show him as Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn doesn't get introduced until later. And then it's like even further down the line that it's revealed that Norman Osborn is Green Goblin.
So I'm curious then, with the spider, it was just like a, I don't know how to say generic radioactive spider, because that's a weird statement.
That's one of the other things with Spider-Man is that he was introduced in Amazing Fantasy number 15 as just like one of their short stories. It was just like a short story morality tale. And I'm not sure what the ethos was at Marvel at the time, if it was a thing where it was like, hey, we're going to make this short morality tale, but also make a cool character design in case we decide we want to, you know, use this character down the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was literally just a science exhibit, like at a generic
Science fair.
Yeah, essentially. At a generic science museum or something, and it says, experiments in radioactivity open to the public. So it was like not tied to Oscorp or Norman Osborn or anything like that. That's one of the tricky things about doing like superhero origin stories in movies is pretty much all of them combine the origin story with some other story.
Yeah.
You know, the Captain America movie is pretty much beat for beat Captain America's origin for the first half of the movie, and then they add in Red Skull stuff and use a Red Skull story from later on. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is pretty much beat for beat. The first half of that movie is pretty much beat for beat the original Spider-Man origin story, you know, including the wrestler and everything. Then they add in Norman Osborn stuff and Green Goblin stuff, which is funny because like that's what Ultimate Spider-Man does as well, where when they redo Peter Parker's origin, it is directly tied into Norman Osborn and directly tied into Norman Osborn becoming the Green Goblin and everything.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what's expected with comics, is that everything is connected in some way, shape, or form. And I can see from what you're talking about with the origins of Spider-Man, when it came to the X-Men, and they're just like, you know what? Origin stories are exhausting. They're just born with powers. They're born with supernatural abilities.
The story I heard is that Stan Lee was saying, like, we're getting sick of trying to come up with different science experiments for all of these superheroes. Let's just say they're mutants.
Yeah, brilliant.
Being a mutant isn't a disease. It's something you're born with. It's as normal as being a traditional Homo sapien.
So yeah, David Fincher's out of the picture. Chris Columbus, he actually declined because he was making a little film called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Yep.
Amy Pascal, are you familiar with Amy Pascal? Because she's going to come up a lot throughout the story.
I don't think so.
So she's the head of pictures at Sony, or at least at the time. She is really like the driving force behind a lot of Sony's movies, just in general. Just like she is the one that looks over and is the head of a lot of the films that are happening at Sony. So she ultimately gives the green light or just like shuts down a film.
Gotcha.
So Amy Pascal, she did meet with Tim Burton on directing. Not much is known about the meeting, and it seems like Burton was just not interested. There's an unofficial quote from Burton stating that, I guess I'm just a DC guy. But knowing his experience with superhero films and WB, he might have just not wanted to go through that all again.
It also kind of makes sense that he would just be like a DC guy. His style of storytelling, I think, is more fitting for DC characters than it is for Marvel characters.
Yeah, especially with the rogues gallery of villains in the Batman universe. It's definitely up his aisle.
I mean, there's that classic adage that DC characters are gods trying to be real people and Marvel characters are real people trying to be gods.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Like you think about characters like Edward Scissorhands or just like a lot of these other Tim Burton-y type things, his stories are so much more these crazy, unbelievable people that are trying to figure out how to have normal lives. It does kind of make sense that he would just be more of a DC guy in general.
Yeah. The documentary about the Nightmare Before Christmas, he talked about his style where he's like, he always gravitates towards movies about loners and just someone who is put into a society. And part of that was that how he grew up, because he grew up in the suburbs of Burbank and he was a weird kid who was just trying to find his way in the world. And a lot of what he experienced as a kid, he was into spooky things, but he said that his favorite holiday was Christmas. And yet he felt like he just didn't fit in to what the norms of Christmas celebrations were. So that makes complete sense as to why. Now, you may have noticed that Sam Raimi was not on the list of considered directors. There was a quote from Raimi. My agent, Josh Donnan, said, "They want to be honest with you. There's about 18 directors they'd rather have than you on the list." And Raimi recalls, "Okay, well, tell them I'm number 19. Raimi managed to get a chance to pitch himself to direct Spider-Man and found himself in a room with Sony Pictures CEO John Calley, Columbia Pictures chair Amy Pascal, Marvel Studios CEO and founder Avi Arad, Sony film executive Matt Tolmach, and the film's producer Laura Ziskin. No pressure.
Yeah.
The pitch began with how much he loved Spider-Man, how he had a painting of him hung on his bedroom wall as a kid. He showed that he understood the character Stan Lee was trying to create, and even the character's flaws, which would make him who he is. It's not that it's about his superpowers. The meeting lasted for about an hour, and Matt Tolmach recalls that suddenly Sam Raimi just looked at his watch, said thank you, and just left.
Wow.
Yeah. For Raimi, he didn't even want to overstay his welcome if he wasn't being considered in the first place. He didn't want to waste any of his or the executive's time. But turns out the meeting actually went really well.
Yeah.
And Amy Pascal was the one who approved Sam Raimi to direct the Spider-Man film in January of 2000.
That's so interesting because, like, looking at his filmography before doing Spider-Man, I would not consider Sam Raimi either. Like, he's a weird horror movie guy. Why would you have this be the director of Spider-Man?
Yeah. I mean, you can consider the same thing with Peter Jackson, too, where you're like,
oh, 100%.
Like this weird indie, gory, odd horror films. And all of a sudden you're just like, yeah, I want to do Lord of the Rings. And you're just like, that's our guy.
Yeah. But at the same time, like, I think that's kind of what made Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie special, and is that, like, he did come at it from a different lens. I think the thing that I appreciate most about his Spider-Man movies is the way it, like, deals with regular people. There's a great video essay by Patrick Willems that's basically arguing that the best part of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and the thing that, like, it does that no other superhero movie does nearly as well, is all of the regular people, all of the random extras who get one line.
Guy with 8 hands. Sounds hot.
He has those tights and that tight little...
Dresses like a spider and he looks like a bug. But we should all just give him one big hug. Look out, ooh, here comes Spider-Man.
All of those people are what make those movies great. And I totally agree. And I feel like that's also kind of a Sam Raimi thing. Like, he does have that nice little touch of, like, there's this crazy weird thing happening, but you know, the character of Ash in The Evil Dead is also like just kind of a normal guy just thrown into like all of this insanity. So from that angle, like makes perfect sense that he would know how to do Peter Parker.
Yeah. And he just does like weird, silly things. When watching The Multiverse of Madness, there are like little quips in there where you can definitely tell that this is a Sam Raimi moment.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
the whip hand moments. There's the giant eyeball is another one.
That zombified Doctor Strange at the end.
And then there's a moment where the Scarlet Witch like crawls out of the mirror. And I was like, this feels like one of his best films, Drag Me to Hell.
Yeah.
Which, in my opinion, is like the most Sam Raimi movie ever made.
In my mind, the best scene of any superhero movie, my favorite scene of any superhero movie is the train sequence in Spider-Man 2. When he's got the mask off, all the people on the train are helping him out. That whole sequence, for me, that's what I love about superhero stories. I love the idea of like how regular people respond to the actions of superheroes, which is a thing that is so lacking, especially in like modern MCU. My favorite MCU scene, for example, would be the scene in Winter Soldier where the random SHIELD guy refuses to launch the ships and he goes, no, I'm not
going to launch those ships. Captain's orders.
Move away from your station.
That scene gives me chills every single time because this is just a regular dude. He's not special, but he's like, fuck it, I'm going to do the right thing here.
Yeah.
Even though he knows it would save everybody 5 seconds. Like it would literally, all that needs to happen is he gets shot in the head and then Crossbones launches the ships instead. He knows that that action is like not the most like craziest thing in the world, but he still does the right thing. And that to me is like, I love that stuff.
Yeah.
That's something that Sam Raimi gets so well. Sam Raimi's got the, you know, you mess with one of us,
Yes,
you mess with all of us.
Yes.
You mess with Spider-Man, you mess with New York City. Love it.
I don't know who was talking about it. It was some podcast I was listening to where the guy was like, I cry so easily in movies. And oh no, it was a Game Changer. It was on Dropout. One of the contestants was like, the last time I cried was at a Spider-Man movie. And it wasn't even like a sad moment. It was that one part where it's like when everyone comes together for one cause, it just gets me every time.
Yep. I'll tell you the recent, I guess this is sort of a superhero. It's based off a comic book property. These characters are kind of superheroes. That does something similar to that I really loved was the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Have you seen it?
I have, yes.
That movie, really good. Like one of those movies that's way better than it has any right to be, but it has a fantastic sequence of all of the regular people helping the superheroes out.
Yeah.
And it made me like so happy in the theaters. I love it.
Yeah, back to the development of Spider-Man. To write the movie was David Koepp. Now, even though Sony did not consider reviving James Cameron's script, Koepp did read it and was inspired by many aspects that Cameron brought to the story. There's a quote from David Koepp. He pushed the metaphor of adolescent sexual development really far. There's a great moment where Peter wakes up in bed with web strands all over himself. It's like, wow, I don't even know what to do with the wet dream thing, but that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Even just the fact that Cameron had taken it seriously was a big deal. It legitimized it in people's minds. Not the least of all, probably Sony. Now, what Koepp did take from Cameron's story was Spider-Man's web shooters being organic and not a mechanism that Peter Parker creates. Now, Raimi really liked the idea and wanted to incorporate this into the movie, and online fans were not happy when they heard about this change. But then again, when are they ever happy about anything?
I feel like it is better to keep him with the web shooters because it keeps the genius part of his character intact.
Yeah.
Frankly, the metaphor for puberty is like, all right, that's kind of okay, guys.
I remember I heard this theory once. It was a question that was proposed of like, what makes a really good Spider-Man movie? And he said there needs to be a few elements to it. One, Peter Parker needs to be up against regular life, meaning that if he's in high school, maybe there's a test that he needs to study for, or he has bad luck with women. He's trying to get Mary Jane, just like is failing in that aspect. Or like because he's living in poverty, like he needs to help Aunt May make more money.
The go-to things in a lot of early Spider-Man comics is, oh, Aunt May's in the hospital, but also I got to go punch Sandman or something like that.
Yeah. So like him dealing with real life. And then on top of that, you have a villain coming in just to be like, I'm going to mess up everything. He's like, I got to take care of that thing as well. And then the resolve to all of his problems, he needs to figure out oftentimes through science, because that's ultimately what he is. He is a child of science.
Yeah.
Yeah. So having him with the web shooters then establishes so early on that like he is a science genius.
He's some sort of a scientist himself.
Harry tells me you're quite the science whiz. You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
So I like that aspect of him creating the web shooters. But yeah, it was just created for this film. I don't know if they've put that into the comics, though, with Ultimate.
In Ultimate Spider-Man, no, it's still web shooters. However, I know that there are other spider people that the webbing is organic. I'm probably going to get some stuff wrong because, like, there's a lot of other spider people that I only know from, like, reading Spider-Verse comics. I believe Silk's webbing is organic, for example, and she's, like, a 616 character. Do you know about Silk? She's a 616 character where, like, basically the story is that she was bitten by the same radioactive spider as Peter and then immediately put into a bunker. I don't remember if it's like to keep her safe or to keep the world safe or something, but then like eventually comes out and is like, you know, has a totally different experience of her superpowers than Peter Parker does. But I believe her webbing is like organic. I know there's other versions of Spider-Man in like the Spider-Verse comics that have that. One other thing about the web shooters that is a great reason to use web shooters is a very common problem for Spider-Man is, oh no, I'm out of web fluid, which is a perfect Spider-Man type issue. Spider-Man's a perfect character to have like some minor inconvenience that's really, really annoying. And it's not like, oh, I lost my powers. It's like, oh, there's one thing that I rely on, like I can't do right now. Spider-Man's like the only superhero I can think of in the comics that I've read that has a cold in issues. And there's been multiple storylines where Spider-Man just has a cold. It just, that's a thing he's dealing with for 3 issues.
Hey, you're that spider guy.
Spider-Man.
Huh?
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man is the type of character who just like has to deal with having a cold while being a superhero.
Amazing.
So yeah, that's another reason why having web shooters can offer you more opportunities in storytelling.
Yeah, no, I like that. So with David Koepp, he was one of the most sought after writers. Prior to, he wrote Death Becomes Her, Jurassic Park, Carlito's Way, Mission Impossible, The Lost World, Jurassic Park, and Snake Eyes, just to name a few. What made his story compelling was something that the studio was afraid to take on. In a Variety interview, he explains, quote, "My big pitch was it should take a really long time for Peter Parker to become Spider-Man. He's not going to have the outfit on for 45 minutes, and that's okay. It's such a powerful origin story. We really need to stretch it out. And the other thing is, the couple is not going to get together in the end. They have to end apart, because that's romantic." That Sony was willing to embrace. Both those things I thought also showed they have some creative nerve. Because traditional thinking is, by page 10, he becomes a superhero, and at the end, everything is fine. But we're trying to do something different.
And I think that was absolutely the right instinct.
Oh, yeah.
Peter Parker's origin and making him struggle and fail before actually getting in the costume, like, that's a great decision. Also, Peter Parker should not end up with the girl at the end of the story because Peter Parker very rarely is successful in love.
Yeah.
People always talk about how Peter Parker was going after Gwen Stacy before Mary Jane. Gwen Stacy's not even the first prospective girlfriend for Peter Parker. I think she's like the 3rd or 4th.
Oh, wow.
Because like he's interested in Liz Allen, who was a character in Spider-Man Homecoming. He's also gets interested and I think even dates Betty Brant for a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
That's one other thing that, you know, I get why they did it, but I kind of dislike about the Sam Raimi movies. The fact that it's like Mary Jane is his one true love from the beginning. And it's like, man, Mary Jane was like never Peter Parker's one true love.
Yeah.
But that's actually something from like the Ultimate Universe, because Ultimate Spider-Man is like Peter and MJ right away. And I don't know if that ever really changes in the course of that story.
Huh. I know there's a whole storyline of, was it Spider-Man loves Mary Jane or something like that? It was a very short-lived run.
Oh, interesting. Because they were together for a long time in comics, and then there was a famous storyline where, like, they got their memory of being together erased or something like that. That was like a famous thing that a lot of people didn't like, but now current 616 Peter Parker, I believe, is single.
So yeah, in the early draft, Doc Ock was supposed to be the secondary villain, but Raimi felt that the film would get too cluttered by trying to explain 3 separate origin stories.
Yeah.
Later rewrites were done by Scott Rosenberg. He wrote Gone in 60 Seconds, Con Air, and High Fidelity. Rosenberg removed Doc Ock and many action sequences, including Spider-Man saving Maximilian Fargus, who was the wheelchair-using Oscorp executive, and Spider-Man defusing a hostage situation on a train. Another writer that was brought in was Alvin Sargent. He wrote Paper Moon and What About Bob to help with the dialogue between Mary Jane and Peter Parker.
That makes a lot of sense.
Oh, come on. Try me.
I want to act on stage.
Really? Well, that's perfect. You're awesome in all the school plays.
Really?
Yeah. I cried like a baby when you played Cinderella.
Peter, that was first grade.
Well, even so.
Have you ever seen Paper Moon? I watched that movie for the
Moon,
first time a couple of years ago. It's a good movie.
It's on the list of like every top 100 movies you need to see before you die.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it like a 100 best movie. Like, it's not like a great and important movie like a Kubrick film or The Godfather, you know, Citizen Kane or something like that. But it's one of those movies that is just like, just really, really good. It's just such a solid film. And it didn't really inspire anything else as far as I know or change the course of filmmaking. It's just a really good movie.
I will have to check that out for sure. I have seen What About Bob?
Yes.
And that's a great film. For Sam Raimi explaining his perspective on the story, quote, I wanted to make sure we weren't making it an in on the joke with an audience presentation. For me, there was no joke. I don't want to be a safe filmmaker saying, I know this is goofy, but let's pretend like it isn't. I feel like that was the mentality for like a lot of the Joel Schumacher movies was like, it's campy. That's what it is.
I mean, it's something that the MCU does every now and then where they have somebody call out how silly a name is or how silly a costume is. And it's like, I don't need that.
I'm Peter, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're using your made up names.
Give me the fact that like these people like their name and like their costumes and stuff.
I like your vest.
God, I knew it. I knew you did. It's so cool, right?
It's cool. Yes.
And you can put so much stuff in there. You wouldn't even know.
That was something that I was so thrilled about watching Miss Marvel. The sequence of her talking to her dad and starts using the name Miss Marvel and the explanation behind that. I was like, I loved that sequence so much because it was Marvel being like, yeah, this is a good name and we like it.
Yeah.
We're not going to be like, yeah, I guess I'm stuck with the name Ant-Man. I know it's kind of dorky, but whatever. It's like, no, we like this name and we like being superheroes.
Yeah.
That's what Kamal means in Arabic. Perfect. But in Urdu, it's more like, what's the word? Wonder. Marvel. Kamal means marvel.
I share the same name as Carol frickin' Danvers.
I don't know who that is. But you sure are, and always have been, our own little Miss Marvel.
Continuing the quote, I never wanted to have that separation for me and the material or assume that the audience had it. There was no safe space. There was simply just believing that Peter Parker exists and investing wholly in his heart in the matters of his soul and sharing that drama with the audience.
You know, that also kind of reminds me of the marketing ethos, at least, but I feel like just kind of the ethos in general of the first Superman movie.
Oh, yeah.
You'll Believe a Man Can Fly.
Yeah.
That movie is very much trying to be like, we are going to play this straight. We're going to say like, hey, we're going to make this feel real and feel like reality. And we're not going to like wink and nod at how silly it is.
Speaking of Superman. When casting Peter Parker, Raimi met with a lot of actors, but he wasn't looking for someone that wasn't like Christopher Reeve. It can't be a tall and handsome man. They needed someone that could embody a working class high school nerd who can't get the girl. Amy Pascal was in communication with Heath Ledger, but he didn't seem right for the role.
I could see that though.
Yeah. Wes Bentley was also recommended, but he didn't fit the role.
Oh, I know who that is. Yeah, I don't think he would be right either. This would have been right after American Beauty. He's definitely got a little bit too much of like a...
He seems more menacing than like...
He could have been a good Harry Osborn.
Yeah, he really could have. Other people that were considered, Scott Speedman, Jay Roden, James Franco, and Joe Manganiello. They all auditioned for the role. Now, Franco, he would later be cast as Peter's best friend, Harry Osborn, and also Spider-Man's sworn enemy, Manganiello. He went on to become Flash Thompson, which was Peter Parker's bully.
One of the things that I loved about reading early Spider-Man comics, the character of Flash Thompson is one of my favorites. And I know he becomes like a big part of like Venom's story in the future, but high school Flash Thompson, I love so much because he's like the Peter Parker bully, but he's also obsessed with Spider-Man and is like literally Spider-Man's biggest fan. And there's like a whole comic story of him dressing up as Spider-Man and trying to fight crime.
That's
because
incredible.
he loves Spider-Man so much, which is something that like the MCU Spider-Man does a little bit of Flash being a Spider-Man fan.
Yeah.
The way they do that in the comic, I love so much. It's so good.
That's brilliant. I kind of wish that they put that in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, but I really like that dynamic.
It's a detail that's hard to make room for, especially because there's so much going on with Spider-Man. That's the incredible thing about like Spider-Man comics, especially Silver Age Marvel. No other Marvel series has nearly the like richness of world that Spider-Man has, because Spider-Man has all these characters that are all have their own lives and have something interesting going on. You know, Flash is interesting, Betty Brant is interesting, J. Jonah Jameson is interesting. All these characters have stuff going on, and no other Silver Age Marvel comic has like even close to that.
Interesting.
The rest of the Marvel comics is like really only interesting when the characters are in costume. The other one that I like is Fantastic Four, because I love the character dynamics, their family bickering that they're constantly in. They do a really good job of that, but they don't have the same like external people, you know, inhabiting their life in the same way that like Spider-Man comics are super interesting to read when he's in the suit and when he's out of suit. In fact, Silver Age, probably more interesting to read when he's not in costume.
Huh. All right. So yeah, Tobey Maguire was then considered after Raimi saw him in the film The Cider House Rules. You ever see that movie?
No, I haven't.
It's basically one of those Oscar bait films.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got Michael Caine in it. From Amy Pascal on casting Maguire, quote, Tobey might not have been the most obvious choice if you're casting what is the most important role of any character that is happening in the studio, because he wasn't that kind of person. He was a magnificent actor and inhabited all the qualities that Peter Parker needed to have. To be honest, he was Sam Raimi's choice, and Sam was steadfast. He wouldn't make it with anyone else. And Maguire was hired for the role in July of 2000. He immediately started training for the role and was put on a strict vegan diet. It didn't have to be vegan. Tobey just happens to be vegan himself. It's more apparent now just because of like all the Marvel
workout stuff.
Yeah, the Marvel workout. Like it's become a thing where like getting that superhero body is like much more known now, whereas before that wasn't really the case. When he was training, he had a physical trainer, he had a yoga instructor, he learned martial arts and climbing. He also studied spiders and tried to replicate their movement when climbing up walls.
Interesting. That movie does such a good job at showing the movement of Spider-Man climbing and swinging in a way that, like, I know I've heard a story that for all of like the swinging around, they consulted Cirque du Soleil performers and stuff and used them as references for like all of the swinging around New York sequences.
I didn't realize that. That makes sense now. Like when he goes down, like he arches his back and then like he curls into himself in order for him to like fly up even higher. That totally makes sense now.
These motions that we've only seen in still panel form, making those come alive in live action. They did an excellent job with that.
Yeah. I always love looking for this whenever I watch any superhero movies. Like, where is the splash page moment?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a moment it was Avengers 2 where they're like going into Russia, and there's that moment where they all jump over the barrier and like you can see all of them.
Or there's the classic spin around shot from the first Avengers movie when they're all like assembling in New York.
In Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, there's the scene at the end where he lands on the flagpole, and there it is. There's the American flag. That's the splash page moment.
Yep.
Now, as for the antagonist and villain and surrogate father role of Green Goblin and Norman Osborn, they considered Nicolas Cage.
Okay, Nicolas Cage as Green Goblin.
Pretty great.
That absolutely works.
Mm-hmm.
He would be great.
Yes. There was Jason Isaacs and John Malkovich.
Oh, okay.
Put a pin in that.
I don't know how I feel about Malkovich, but it's an interesting choice.
It is. While filming in Spain, Willem Dafoe met Sam Raimi. Now, Raimi explained to Dafoe the story of Spider-Man, and he was instantly hooked. He even insisted that they make a Green Goblin costume for him because he didn't think a stuntman could convey the movements that he wanted to embody in the character.
Yeah.
He also made sure that the costume was flexible enough for him to do the splits in. Also, the helmet that the Green Goblin wears in the film was not the original mask. The original mask was an animatronic mask created by Amalgamated Dynamics. According to Willem Dafoe, it looked like a rubber Halloween mask, and it was kind of silly. So they had to change the design. Are you looking at the design right now?
No, I wasn't yet. But I do like the idea that they were trying to do an animatronic.
Yeah.
That's like one of the biggest hurdles, even specifically with Spider-Man in live action, is that Spider-Man's eyes and like Goblin's face are so expressive in the comics. How do you do that in the movies? Honestly, I do think just design-wise, that is one of the, I wouldn't call it a failing necessarily, but something that the movie was not able to capture was Spider-Man's eyes and Green Goblin's face. That's like the one thing that the movie failed to bring into the live action world from the comic.
Yeah. I think with the original design, you had a lot more faithfulness to what Green Goblin looked like in the comics. I don't know if you're looking at it right now.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now with those big orange eyes.
Yeah, it doesn't seem real. Like, it seemed like someone just made a really great Halloween mask. It's kind of weird to try and picture this being put into the film.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it could work. I don't hate it at all. I think it could have worked, but I'm not watching it move right now. So, wait a minute. There is an original screen test video.
Oh.
Yep, from Amalgamated Dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, this doesn't look too bad.
Oh. Okay.
Why did Willem Dafoe not like it? He just said it looked like a dumb Halloween mask.
Yep.
I get it. If you're somebody who's not familiar with the comics, it's like a little too goofy, but I think it could have worked.
Yeah, this looks really good. I do enjoy this one. Yeah. Other castings in this film, there was a new to the industry, Elizabeth Banks. She auditioned for the role of Mary Jane Watson. She was told by the producer that she was too old for the role, but they did like her, and they eventually cast her as J. Jonah Jameson's secretary, Betty Brant.
Hey, chin up, okay?
Other potential actresses that were almost MJ were Kate Bosworth, Kate Hudson, Eliza Dushku, Mina Savari, and Jamie King. Ultimately, the role went to Kirsten Dunst just a month before shooting had begun.
Hey!
How was your audition?
How'd you know?
The hotline. Your mom told my aunt, told me.
J.K. Simmons was one of the few actors that did not audition for his role. In fact, he learned that he was cast in Spider-Man through a fan that read it on a fan website. And then 3 hours later, Simmons got a call from his agent confirming that he was portraying the editor-in-chief at the Daily Bugle.
He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
Still the most perfect casting in
yes.
comic book history. And there's a reason that they have never attempted to have anybody else play J. Jonah Jameson.
Yeah, even in the reboot, it was just an email address. That's who plays J. Jonah Jameson, is just an email address.
That's what I love about Across the Spider-Verse. Every version of J. Jonah Jameson in that movie is voiced by J.K. Simmons.
It's still J.K. Simmons.
It's incredible. One of my favorite things that movie does.
Now what kind of crazy place did Goblin take?
Said it before.
Wait.
3 words. Spider-Man
Menace. The Jonah that I know? Check.
Stanley was considered for the role, but Sony felt that he was getting too old for that. But Stan was just fully supportive of J.K. Simmons taking on the role and stated that he did a much better job than he could have ever done.
Yeah, it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now I want to see a Stanley biopic starring J.K. Simmons.
Now, a cameo that nearly happened was Hugh Jackman as Wolverine.
Oh, whoa.
In a Huffington Post interview in 2013, Jackman revealed that he nearly appeared in the first Spider-Man film, but it never happened because the filmmakers were unable to obtain Wolverine's costume that Hugh wore in the first X-Men movie.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
So simply because of logistics,
yeah,
he just was not in the movie.
Interesting.
So filming had began around January 8th, 2001. And because it was New York City, a lot of the shots included the Twin Towers. Now, after the 9/11 attacks, many of those sequences were reshot to not include the Twin Towers. Some of the original footage can be found on Sony's stock footage website. Unfortunately, a standalone teaser trailer for Spider-Man was circulating starting summer of 2001 that featured the Twin Towers as a trap Spider-Man used to create a web between to catch robbers flying away in a helicopter.
Sit back and enjoy the ride.
After the attack, Sony was quick to pull the trailer from theaters. The trailer was recently uploaded to YouTube in 2019 by user YoshiKiller2S, with multiple copycats that followed. So you can still watch this trailer just with a simple Google search. Have you seen this trailer?
Oh, yeah. Famously, this is the reason that I can always remember what year Running with Scissors comes out. Because that was an ongoing bit we had back in the Weird Alphabet days, because I remembered that Running with Scissors came out in 2002, because I was like, because the Spider-Man original trailer had the Twin Towers in it and they had to remove it, which means that, Spider-Man came out, 6 months after 9/11. And since Running with Scissors came out the same year, that's how I always remember.
Then there was producer Aviarad. He recalled the moment that he wanted to show Stan Lee Spider-Man thwipping and swinging through NYC. The only way that they could achieve this was by making Spidey completely computer generated. They first showed Stan the previs version of Spider-Man. Do you know what I mean by previs?
Yeah, that's where they don't fully render and don't fully animate, but just to get a sense of the motion. It's like one step up from storyboarding.
Yeah, and it's great for like screen tests with producers and the directors, so they get a sense of what's going on without like having to like fully render it.
You mentioned Aviarad. He is one of those people who has been involved in a lot of Marvel movies for a while.
He is involved with like every Spider-Man movie.
Yes. And the story that I heard is that Spider-Man No Way Home was like his dream for forever, of bringing the different Spider-Men together in one movie. That was like something that he specifically had been pushing for, to bring Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland together.
Interesting. That makes sense. He's like the driving force behind Spider-Man. He makes mostly great decisions, and then there are definite decisions where he is just the stick in the spokes. But he was showing Stan Lee the previs version of Spider-Man sweeping through the air, and Stan Lee was just, he didn't understand the previs. I mean, given this is like still the early days of CGI. Like, why would he? He saw this and was like, he was just worried. He thought this was the final version of the film, and he's like, I don't think this is going to work. It was then explained to him that like, okay, it needs to be rendered. So then instead of showing him the previs versions, they're like, okay, we're going to fully render things now. And then we're going to show Stan Lee. And when he saw it, apparently he had tears in his eyes, and he was like, they're finally making a Spider-Man movie. And this is a movie that he has been fighting for about 20 years. And he finally gets that realization.
That's awesome.
So the film opened on May 3rd, 2002. And I specifically remember this because I saw the midnight screening of this movie. I was so excited to see it. I was in middle school, I believe, at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was allowed to go out, see the film, and just, it was an experience for sure. That was back when like midnight screenings were like a regular thing. Nowadays, they just like pretty much premiere the movie the day before, and they're just like, it doesn't matter. But this is back when like they couldn't show it until after midnight, and I was able to see it, and it was it was everything. Originally, the plan was to premiere the movie in November of 2001, but there were a lot of post-production delays. One of which was the Green Goblin and Spider-Man. Whenever they were fighting each other or in the same scene with each other, they couldn't actually be on the same soundstage as each other, or at least chroma key screen, for example. So with Spider-Man, he's wearing red and blue. You can put him in front of a green screen, but you can't put him in front of a blue screen. He's going to blend in with that.
Yeah.
But if you have a green screen, you can't have the Green Goblin in front of that. So they had to shoot him in front of a blue screen and shoot them separately. So they had like a stunt person come in to like fight, and then they would just like take him out and then put in the actual Spider-Man.
That is rough.
Yeah. But nowadays we have the wraparound screens. So when the film hit theaters, it was a big success. Bigger than Sony ever expected. It even broke the record for making over $100 million in its opening weekend, the first movie to ever do so.
Wow.
For Sam Raimi, recalling this experience, quote, "I've never made a hit movie, from 1980 when we made Evil Dead to 2002 when this came out. I had to survive by telling myself box office doesn't matter. I knew even that however big the opening weekend was, that wasn't really the result of something that could claim as his own. It's standing on the shoulders of Stan Lee and maybe 60 years of writers in the Marvel bullpens, of artists and writers who made the animated Spider-Man TV series that kids loved."
It's easy to pick out one person and say, this is the person who made Spider-Man, but like there's so many names that have contributed to the stories of Spider-Man and what like makes that character great.
Yeah. Sony didn't even wait for the film to premiere to start pre-production on the sequel. They began in April of 2002 when they hired Alfred Goh and Miles Millar to write the sequel. They were the writers behind Smallville. The first film wouldn't have premiered until a month later. After the success of the opening weekend, Sony was quick to announce that there would be a sequel with the temporary title, The Amazing Spider-Man.
Huh.
David Koepp was brought on to help write the story with Goh and Millar. This time, it was Koepp who wanted to include a Gwen Stacy storyline and have her killed in the middle of the second movie.
In the middle of the movie?
Yeah.
Like, this is one of the things that the reasons why I'm not a fan of, like, Mary Jane is Spider-Man's one true love all the time, is that it robs the meaning from Gwen Stacy's death.
Yeah.
There is absolutely zero indication that Peter Parker would ever be with anybody else when Gwen Stacy died. Mary Jane was a character already, but there was absolutely no, like, even flirtiness between Peter Parker and Mary Jane at that time. It was all about Gwen Stacy. Setting up in the first movie that he's interested in Mary Jane and then bringing in Gwen Stacy only to kill her halfway through the movie completely robs that story of its meaning.
Yeah, it just feels like she's more of a casualty than, like, his one true love.
Yeah.
But they didn't include that, thank God. Later that year, in September 2002, Michael Chabon was hired as a writer. Prior to, Chabon published his novel, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, a story about two Jewish cousins that become major figures in the comic industry during the golden era in World War II. He also pitched an X-Men movie and Fantastic Four movie that were rejected. In Chabon's draft, he included a much younger Doc Ock that becomes infatuated with Mary Jane. While the two are on a date, Octavius uses his mechanical tentacles to injure two muggers, and this horrifies Mary Jane. This leads to Spider-Man facing off with Doc Ock, and when his tentacles fuse together, it begins to kill him. We find out that Doc Ock is the creator of the genetically altered spider that bites Peter in the first film. Doc Ock offers Peter an antidote to rid himself of his Spidey powers, releasing him from his responsibilities of being Spider-Man. Octavius's actual plan is to weaken Peter so much that he can kill him, then remove his spine and replace that with his own so that he can live. Before that, Doc Ock makes a deal with Harry Osborn and makes Spider-Man a wanted criminal, and they use the Daily Bugle to advertise a $10 million reward for anyone that can catch him, and the whole city turns against Spider-Man.
I don't know how I feel about this. I don't like the regular people turn against Spider-Man, not after we already had the, you mess with Spider-Man, you mess with New York scene.
Yeah. I mean, J. Jonah Jameson is always doing that anyways, trying to turn the city against him. But everyone in the city sees past that, and you're just like, yeah, he's Spider-Man. He's saving us.
It's a very pessimistic view of the regular people, and I'm glad that's not the version we got.
Yeah.
It's an interesting story, and I know there have been interesting stories of everybody turning against Spider-Man, but the motivation for that should be everybody thinks Spider-Man killed someone or something like that. Not everybody is greedy and wants money,
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, Raimi, he read through multiple drafts, picking out elements that he liked. And with the help of screenwriter Alvin Sargent, he's coming back in, the guy who wrote Paper Moon and What About Bob, he wrote a draft that included all of Sam Raimi's favorite elements. For Sam Raimi, he wanted to create a story that was similar to Superman 2. He wanted to explore a story where Peter is struggling to find a balance between his real life and his Spider-Man life, the conflict between his personal wants and his heroic responsibilities, and what happens if he gives that up. The story also drew elements from the comics, especially Doc Ock's 1963 debut and the 1966 storyline, If This Is My Destiny, and the 1967 storyline, Spider-Man No More, and the Amazing Spider-Man number 50.
If These Be My Destiny, Spider-Man No More, those are two such classic stories, and it's something that Spider-Man has done a bunch of times ever since then of Peter Parker trying to give up the suit. The artist on Spider-Man 50, John Romita, recently passed away. In remembrance of John Romita, he is somebody who has drawn, so many Marvel comics, but the one image that they used was his comic for Spider-Man 50, which is this famous image of Peter Parker kind of walking sullenly with this enormous figure of Spider-Man behind him with his back turned to him.
Oh, yeah. I've seen this before. I didn't realize the context of it, but wow. Yeah.
There's another famous image, which I think comes from one of these comics, of the Spider-Man suit in a trash can, which is an image that has been referenced so many times. It's also from the same comic, from Spider-Man 50. It's a panel from the issue of the Spider-Man costume in a trash can while Peter Parker is walking away.
Oh, yes.
This is another extremely famous image from that issue.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it's also something that has been referenced in a bunch of other spider people throwing their costume in the trash can and walking away.
Yeah.
I can't believe I forgot about this until I did this image search. It's an image that they literally put in Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, because I remember that.
I can't believe I forgot about that. I don't think I've rewatched Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, since getting into the comics, but...
Raimi did make a slight change to Doc Ock's backstory, where Otto Octavius is a personal hero of Peter Parker. Instead of killing him, Peter wanted to rid Octavius of his demons. For Otto Octavius, they were considering Ed Harris, Chris Cooper, and Christopher Walken.
Christopher Walken might have been a little weird, but I could definitely see the other two actors doing a good job with that.
Yeah, Ed Harris, he has a great villain, bad guy look to him.
Oh, yeah.
I can see him in that position.
And I also think that's a really smart change for the character of Doc Ock as well, because in the comics, so many early villains, there's no connection at all. He's just some dude who got tentacle arms fused to his back and now is doing crimes that Spider-Man's got to go deal with. Although the comics do start to build in a personal connection because he has a weird on and off romance with Aunt May all the time. But
Raimi then cast Alfred Molina and was impressed by his performance in Frida and thought he would be a good fit for the role. Just a bit about Doc Ock. For Doc Ock's mechanical arms, the practical arms were built by Edge FX. The harness with the 8-foot-long arms were built out of metal, rubber, and foam rubber and weighed about 100 pounds. For each of the tentacles, they were controlled by one puppeteer per tentacle, and they would have to rehearse together with Molina ahead of the shoot. The tentacles were then nicknamed Death Flowers, and Molina actually named each one of them Larry, Harry, Mo, and Flo, because Flo was operated by the one female puppeteer. Onto the casting. For Peter Parker, the obvious choice is Tobey Maguire, especially since he signed a 3-picture deal with Sony. But this became a little more complicated. Between filming Spider-Man 1 and 2, Maguire filmed Seabiscuit. And while filming, his pre-existing back condition started to bother him. He actually had a herniated disc. Raimi was warned that if Tobey were to injure his back, there was a chance that he could be paralyzed.
Oh, wow.
Maguire then pulled back on doing a lot of his own stunts just to prevent injury.
Yep.
It got to the point that Sam and Tobey just joked about it, which led to the improv line.
My back! Oh, my back!
And that became a runner all the way into...
No Way Home.
Yeah.
My back. It's kind of stiff from all the swinging, I guess.
Oh, yeah, no, I got a middle back thing, too.
Really?
Yeah.
But if Maguire did get seriously injured or dropped out of the second film, Jake Gyllenhaal was cast as a potential replacement, since there was a claim that the two actors looked nearly identical.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that is true because I don't really think they look familiar, but this was a joke that was even put into an episode of Celebrity Deathmatch.
Okay.
There was a Celebrity Deathmatch between Tobey Maguire and Jake Gyllenhaal. The running gag was like, the announcers were watching the fight and they were just like, I don't know who is hitting each other. I don't know who's winning because they both look like the same person.
Do you have any idea which one of them won?
Not a clue, Johnny.
But in 2019, Gyllenhaal stated in a Yahoo Entertainment interview that he was one of many that was considered to replace Tobey. During filming, they developed a camera rig known as the Spider Cam. This allowed the filmmakers to show a POV of Spider-Man when thwipping through the city. They first tested the rig in the final shot of the first film and then utilized it more in the second film. The way that this works is that the camera is attached to wires that can be controlled to go up and down. Those wires were attached to a crane to give a sense of movement. The footage was shot in 6 frames per second so that when they sped up the footage, it looked like it was moving really fast as Spider-Man would. Needless to say, a lot of money was saved in the post-production special effects because they didn't need to animate Spider-Man whipping through the air anymore.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2 premiered in theaters on June 30th, 2004, and broke the first Spider-Man opening day record of $39.4 million and racking in $40.4 million. The film was critically acclaimed and is still considered one of the best superhero movies of all time.
Yep.
Roger Ebert even claimed that Spider-Man 2 was, quote, the best superhero movie since the modern genre was launched with Superman in 1978.
Yeah. I wouldn't call it my favorite superhero movie, or I don't even know if I would call it the best superhero movie, but it does deserve to be in the conversation as one of the greatest and most important superhero movies ever.
Yeah.
And as I already said earlier in this episode, it does contain my favorite scene in a superhero movie.
A friend of mine was telling me while he was on set, there was a PA who was just pissing off everyone. And he proposed this question to everyone of what is the best sequel ever made? And he said something dumb. And my conclusion after thinking of that question was Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 is easily the best sequel of all time. Although the cinematographer on the set was just it's Empire, you guys. Empire is the best sequel of all time. Yeah.
With a bunch of friends and coworkers, I did a superhero movie bracket of people voting on what they thought the greatest superhero movie of all time was.
I participated in that one.
Yes. Okay, great. It was something 96 movies that I put together, and I made this whole seating algorithm based off of Rotten Tomatoes scores and IMDb scores. Spider-Man 2 was seeded number 7 in that, but ended up losing to the Avengers, getting knocked out by the Avengers, which in hindsight, I feel like maybe I would vote Spider-Man 2 over Avengers. I did this bracket pretty close after Infinity War came out, everybody was high on the Avengers. The winner of that whole bracket, though, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, yeah.
Well deserved, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's the highest ranking Spider-Man movie.
Is it? Oh, I'm not surprised.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Into the Spider-Verse, I think, is my favorite superhero movie ever.
Yeah. So, like the sequel, Sony was already gearing up to put together another Spider-Man movie before the release of Spider-Man 2.
Yep.
Actually, it was 3 months before Spider-Man 2 hit theaters. It was Sony that announced that the third Spider-Man film would be ready for summer of 2007. Around 2 months after the release of Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi and his brother Ivan Raimi, who helped write Army of Darkness and Drag Me to Hell, he wrote a treatment for the third Spider-Man movie. In this, they wanted to explore Peter, learning that he is not a sinless vigilante and considers the humanity of the criminals he's up against. They wanted to bring back Harry Osborn and conclude his storyline. As the prime antagonist, they wanted Sandman, since he was a visually fascinating character.
Yeah.
In the comics, the Sandman was a petty criminal, but for the film, they wanted to link him to Uncle Ben's death to up the stakes. For Sam Raimi, quote, "The most important thing Peter has to learn is the whole concept of him as the Avenger or him as the hero. He wears the red and blue outfit. With each criminal he brings to justice, he's trying to pay down his debt of guilt he feels for the death of his Uncle Ben. He considers himself a hero and a sinless person versus the villains that he nabs. We felt it would be a great thing for him to learn a little less black and white view of life, and he's not above these people."
Having Uncle Ben's killer be somebody else that Peter has to deal with is a very kind of Hollywood decision that I'm not quite a fan of. I believe in Ultimate Spider-Man, in his origin, he actually kills Uncle Ben's killer or does something that leads to his death.
This is something that they've done in Batman as well, where they try to link the Joker to the death of Bruce Wayne's parents.
Yeah.
It feels too forced.
The thing that it does link to, though, is, oh no, this is a guy that I let get away from me that I didn't stop from, robbing the wrestler or whatever, which I think is already enough of a connection that it's effective.
Yeah.
Having him, also be Sandman or something like that is kind of annoying.
Yeah, I think you can just make him a petty criminal and just be like, that be enough. And when you find out that he's doing this to get money to pay for his daughter's medical treatment, and you're just like,
yeah,
I'm there. I believe it. And if Spider-Man has an issue with that, you can connect that with oh, he is also trying to help his Aunt May in some way, shape, or form. And he does that through whatever means possible. We're on the same page, but we're kind of on different sides of the same coin. I like that parallel.
It's always a weird thing with comic book supervillains and everything that they've got to make the villain connected to the hero in some way. In some ways, I feel like it's successful. Some ways, I don't think it's that successful. One time that I think it worked great was Spider-Man Homecoming with the Vulture.
Yeah, that was great.
Being Liz Allen's dad. That was fantastic.
So yeah, Raimi did also briefly consider another villain to add to the mix, and this was the Vulture, with the potential that Ben Kingsley would portray that role.
Okay. If you look at the original Vulture design, because he's an old bald man with a crooked nose, Ben Kingsley totally could play Vulture.
Oh, definitely. In the original story, the Vulture was going to be an accomplice of Sandman's alter ego, Flint Marko. The character was scrapped when producer Avi Arad convinced Raimi that they should instead do Venom. Raimi was not fully interested in including Venom, but Arad pushed for Venom because he wanted to include villains that modern Spider-Man audiences were familiar with and not use the rogue villains that Raimi really favored.
Yeah, I mean, Venom is such a 90s Marvel type of character. I could definitely see we got to get one of these cool new guys in there. But it does have the problem of you could fit the Vulture into that storyline and have it not take take up too much space. To put Venom in there is just makes the movie extremely crowded.
Then you have to make the movie about Venom.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just include him and just be like just a side character. Like, you basically push Sandman, who was the main big bad, out of the way to be like, okay, the real main big bad is Venom now. It forces the Sandman storyline to get sped up and kind of feels cheaper that way. And then the Venom storyline just didn't feel real. It reeks with producer notes.
Yes, 100%.
So Raimi then just complied with the producer and shoehorned in the villain. Eddie Brock Jr. was already in the script, and he was placed in there mostly as an Easter egg and as a potential setup for the next film. The producers also suggested adding Gwen Stacy as a rival love interest. And in January 2009, Sony hired Alvin Sargent again to write the third film. He also signed a 7-figure deal with Sony and gave him the option to write the fourth film. Now, with all the additions being thrown at him, Sargent considered splitting the film into 2, but he couldn't make a satisfying intermediate climax to justify splitting the film into 2 and just made it one singular story. I recently watched Spider-Man 3, and I kind of agree that too much is happening. You put in too many ingredients in the stew, and it just ruined it.
Yeah. Side note, by the way, just because you were talking about wanting to bring in a new villain and stuff, as opposed to using these old rogues galleries, do you know who the first Spider-Man villain was in Amazing Spider-Man #1?
Oh, I'm going to guess Electro.
Nope. It was the Vulture.
Oh, neat.
Yep. Spider-Man Homecoming, even though it didn't do the origin story, goes back to the first Spider-Man comics in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Because that's like the only Spider-Man movie that has Peter interested in Liz Allen,
Yeah.
you know? Like,
I guess that makes sense. Yeah, they put so much of the original. Huh, interesting.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Spider-Man's first villain was not the Vulture. That was his second villain. His first villain was the Chameleon.
Oh.
Do you know who the Chameleon is?
I do not.
He's a guy that makes masks of other people's faces and pretends to be other people.
Oh. He's up against Mission Impossible.
Yes, basically.
Ethan Hunt.
Yes.
There seems to be a lot of uncertainty when filming the third Spider-Man. Thomas Hayden Church, he is the actor who portrayed Sandman.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about his experience filming the movie with comicbookresources.com. He mentioned that when he signed on to do the film, there wasn't a script ready for him to read. And when it came to the end of his characters, they shot 4 different endings. But instead, they went with an ending of Sandman just disintegrating away, in which none of those 4 endings were used at all.
Oof, that really does not sound like a production that knows what it's doing.
Yeah. They did try to ask him about the details of the 4 other endings, but he said that it doesn't matter. And honestly, the ending that they came up with was way better than the 4 other endings that they were trying to do. During the Tokyo premiere of Spider-Man 3, Topher Grace revealed that there were scenes between Eddie Brock and Venom that were cut from the film, and he hoped that he would later include those in the 3.5 version of the film. This is around the time that when DVDs came out, there's the unrated versions. At this time, there were so many extras with DVDs that sometimes they just kind of considered the extra scenes as like the new version of this movie, the thing that you could not see in theaters as like a marketing ploy. So he was really hoping that they would put that into like the new DVD version of it. Now, this prompted fans to look through the archival footage to find a few of the cutscenes, and they did find some interesting things. One was of Adrian Lester, who was portraying the molecular biologist Dr. Wallace, who was working on a cure for Marco's daughter. There was also an alternate death scene for Venom in which it tries to reattach itself to Peter. Then Peter, using the steel rods to create the sonic attack, he then kills the alien symbiote while attached to Spider-Man and not Eddie. So Eddie doesn't actually jump in at the last second there. But that scene didn't make it into the movie, but it did make it into the novelization of Spider-Man 3. Now, behind the scenes, 2 major players left after Spider-Man 2. One was composer Danny Elfman and the visual effects supervisor John Dykstra. Elfman didn't want to return after he had a miserable experience working on Spider-Man 2. Elfman would later work for Raimi again for Oz the Great and Powerful. John Dykstra left after the second film, leaving his colleague Scott Stotdick to take the position. It's unclear why Dykstra left the production, even though he did win an Oscar for Best Visual Effects for Spider-Man 2. It's better known now how overworked special effects artists are, especially with the effects-heavy superhero movies that are happening today. So that might be the component as to why he left. The reliance on special effects increased significantly from the second film, with the visual effects budget, which was 30% larger than the second film. In the iconic scene where Spider-Man punches through Sandman for the first time, there was actually a practical effect. So they had an amputee stuntman who actually extended his cut-off arm and like hit the actor's chest, and then they would just complete the arm with CGI on the other end there. That stuntman is Baxter Humby. Spider-Man 3 premiered May 4th, 2007, and was a huge box office hit, at least for the first weekend, earning nearly $90 million in theaters. It broke its previous opening day record by bringing in $104 million and raked in $117.6 million on Saturday. Financially, the film was a success, but critically, the film was lacking. In a 2014 Collider interview, Raimi admitted that the third film was awful. In 2018, while being interviewed by Screen Rant for the film Venom, producer Avi Arad stated, "I think we learned that Venom is not a sideshow. In all fairness, I take the guilt because of what Sam Raimi used to say in all of his interviews, feeling guilty that I forced him into it." So Avi Arad, like I said, is the stick and the spokes of this bicycle that is Spider-Man.
Yeah. This is a classic example of like, you want somebody in the room who really cares about the original source material, but also not too much.
Yeah.
Not too much that they're going to want to like force in this cool character that they love for the sake of putting them in, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you want that perspective because clearly this is somebody who loves Marvel comics and loves these characters and has a lot of fantastic ideas, but also you need to be willing to say, hey, maybe we don't put this in just because we like it.
Yeah. With Sam Raimi, like, he has a great understanding of what makes a good story and how to use the elements that are given to him to actually achieve that. Typical of Sony, they are already planning on a new Spider-Man movie before the release. And in January of 2007, it was reported by Variety that David Koepp was asked to write the fourth film. Not sure how accurate this reporting is, though, because in October, James Vanderbilt, who wrote Darkness Falls, Zodiac, and The Losers, he was hired to write the fourth Spider-Man movie and agreed to write the two following sequels. The plan was to shoot the fourth film and have the fifth and sixth film shoot back-to-back, since Vanderbilt had an idea of how to connect all these films together. Raimi did not get on board with Vanderbilt's ideas, and any plans for the fifth and sixth films were immediately scrapped.
Do we know what the idea was to connect them all together?
I am not exactly sure.
Marvel's known for its big events in like the 80s and 90s, and I haven't really gotten that far yet. I've started to get into some like events that last multiple issues. It's not the same like big grand design as like things like the Infinity Gauntlet saga would become in the comics. The Spider-Man event that I know the name of as being like probably one of the biggest that would have been out at the time was the Clone Saga, which I don't know anything about other than the name The Clone Saga. And I'm curious if that's like what the connective tissue was. That's the only thing that I can think of as something that they would do as a connective like through line for 3 movies.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what he was planning on. Like, we do have some reporting on what could have happened, so maybe you can kind of guess where it went from there.
Yeah.
So the script was rewritten by playwright and Pulitzer Prize winner David Lindsay Abair. The script was completed around November 2008, and then the script was rewritten again by Seabiscuit writer Gary Ross.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and then he completed that in October of 2009. Now, at this point in the production, it wasn't clear if Sam Raimi, Tobey Maguire, and Kirsten Dunst would be back for the fourth film. Raimi was getting an offer from Legendary and Warner Brothers to direct a World of Warcraft movie and was potentially the front runner to direct the Hobbit film. That was until Guillermo del Toro stepped in to be the director of The Hobbit.
I'm kind of surprised that a World of Warcraft movie was being developed this early.
There were like rumors about it for the longest time that there was going to be a World of Warcraft movie, and no one really knew how that was going to be put together. And I know that when the film did come out, apparently they missed a lot of the core values of the World of Warcraft. So that happened. Now, both Maguire and Dunst, they were the ones that signed a 3-picture deal with Sony, and they would have to renegotiate their contracts for the 4th film, which would mean just like they get more money. If this were the case, if the 3 of them wouldn't return, Sony would then use Vanderbilt's script as a template to relaunch a new series of Spider-Man films. This was also around the time that Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark was in development. We're not going to go into the dark, but that is an interesting moment of history of Spider-Man and Broadway. It seems like development of a 4th Spider-Man movie was still hopeful when MTV News reported in October of 2009 that filming would begin in March the following year, with the release date of May 6, 2011. It was also reported that Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst were set to return, but no other casts were announced. There was another plan to create a Venom spin-off movie in July of 2007. This was not the first attempt to making a standalone Venom movie. Back in 1997, David S. Goyer pitched a Venom movie to New Line Cinema. The film would center around a face-off between Venom and Carnage. They even went as far as casting Dolph Lundgren for the lead role as Eddie Brock.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Plans for that film eventually halted when Sony purchased the theatrical rights to Spider-Man in 1999.
I don't hate it. I don't hate Dolph Lundgren as Venom.
Yeah, that would have been great. Back in 2007, Sony's hope was to give the franchise some longevity and for Sony to continue to hang on to the Spider-Man theatrical license. They took a model from the X-Men franchise where they released X-Men Origins Wolverine. That came out in 2009. Jacob Estes, who wrote Mean Creek, he was hired to write a draft, but Sony was seeking a second writer to create another draft. Although Topher Grace was Eddie Brock in Spider-Man 3, casting agents were considering a different actor to carry the role. In September of 2007, Paul Wernick and Rhett Reese, they both wrote Zombieland and Deadpool. They were hired to write a new draft. Now, Venom co-creator Todd McFarlane was outspoken about this film, stating that a villain wouldn't work well as a central character. After multiple drafts and meetings with Sony and Marvel, who laid out the guidelines of the character, Wernick and Reese turned in their final draft in April of 2009. In an interview with FlickeringMyth.com, Reese revealed that the story was a, quote, realistic, grounded, and a little more dark take on the character.
I don't know how I feel about a realistic and grounded portrayal of Venom.
Oh yeah, this is around the time that The Dark Knight and Nolan's Batman was coming out. So I feel like they saw that and like every studio just like halted everything. It's like, this is how superhero movies have to be done. Yeah. And I think that's what they were going for. Wernick did go into more detail, and he revealed one of the sequences from the script. Quote, imagine a symbiote traveling across a city at some point in the movie, jumping from body to body as it goes, and each person that it inhibits ends up becoming really violent and striking someone else, and then it jumps to the next person. There was a really cool sequence like that in there, which kind of happened in the Venom movie in the beginning of it anyways. Like there's the crash that happens, and then it goes to one of the victims of the crash, and that goes to the paramedic, which then goes to the village, and then whatnot, and eventually makes its way to San Francisco. So it eventually made it into the film. The production seemed to be moving forward when Sony had Gary Ross, who was in the middle of writing the Spider-Man 4 script. He was asked to rewrite and even direct the film. My assumption is that Sony wanted to establish a better connection between the Venom film and the Spider-Man franchise. And they figure who better to know than the guy who's writing the new Spider-Man movie. Mm-hmm. News was still coming out about a potential 4th Spider-Man movie and what that story would include. In 2007, Sam Raimi admitted that he included the character Dr. Kurt Connors, which was Peter's college physics professor, back in Spider-Man 2 so that he could potentially add him as the Lizard down the line.
I'm a physicist, not a biologist. But
that idea was proposed for Spider-Man 4, but it didn't seem to work out that way. In December 2009, MovieLine.com confirmed that the next villain would be the Vulture and Black Cat, potentially portrayed by John Malkovich and Anne Hathaway.
John Malkovich as Vulture is perfect. John Malkovich is a great Vulture. Anne Hathaway as Black Cat is very funny, considering she would later play Catwoman.
Yep. We know from all of the superhero reporting, all the writers that were at DC were also writing at Marvel, and they were bouncing back and forth. Mm-hmm. And there are so many characters that are just pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Deadpool's character is like a direct ripoff of Slade. Yeah. And they even address it in the comics. So like with Black Cat, I mean, that is Catwoman. So Anne Hathaway would have been and was the perfect casting for that. So yeah, about the script, or at least how much we know about it. Adrian Toomes, he is a private contractor who would commit terrible actions on behalf of the U.S. government, thus giving him the nickname the Vulture, because he never left anything behind but the bones.
I like the idea of him being like a government contractor.
Yeah. In the final battle, it would have been between the Vulture and Spider-Man, ending with the Vulture crashing into the Citicorp's building. Now, on June 12th, 2021, animatic producer David E. Duncan uploaded an animatic of the final fight between Spider-Man and the Vulture made for Spider-Man 4. In the description, it reads, quote, "One of a dozen animatics I produced for the ill-fated fourth Sam Raimi movie. Studio politics, creative differences, and bad internet reactions to John Malkovich as Vulture."
Wait, people didn't like John Malkovich as Vulture?
I guess not.
I could see that.
Yeah, I like it too. But the internet's going to internet, and they're going to hate everything.
Yeah.
So this caused them to pull the plug in December of 2009. Early in the prep stage, however, 1 month later, Sony moved forward with the Andrew Garfield reboot. Soon after this, he deleted the video. But through the power of the internet, the video has been saved and actually can be found on YouTube if you want to see that animatic. Anne Hathaway was fully committed to the role of Felicia Hardy. Other potential actresses was Julia Stiles, Rachel McAdams, and Romolia Gari. The lore does veer off the path a bit in the script. Apparently, Felicia Hardy was the daughter of Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture. Instead of becoming Black Cat, she turns into the Vulture's successor and becomes the Vultress.
I have not gotten to Felicia Hardy's introduction to the comics, so I assume that her being the daughter of Vulture is a movie creation, or is that from the comics?
Nope, that is a movie creation, and the Vultress is also a movie creation.
Yes.
Yeah. Raimi did state in 2003 to superherohype.com that had he made Spider-Man 4, Felicia Hardy would have been Black Cat. Storyboard artist Jeffrey Henderson revealed in Gizmodo in 2016 that Raimi wanted to do something more with his longtime friend Bruce Campbell. Instead of giving him a small one-day on-set cameo, they wanted to reveal him as the character named Quentin Beck. And he was Mysterio the whole time.
Yeah. Okay. I like that idea.
In the opening scene, he leads a team of lesser-known villains pulled from comics such as The Shocker, The Prowler, The Stilt Man.
Yeah, Stilt Man!
And The Rhino. In 2022, Raimi also revealed to Rolling Stones that he would also include Kraven the Hunter in the mix somehow.
This sounds like Sinister Six. Mysterio leading the Sinister Six. And this is like the most like D-list tier superheroes, Sinister Six. I mean, you're putting in Stilt Man. I love this idea, actually.
Mm-hmm. There might be some storyboards of this, but the idea was like the cold open was supposed to be a heist led by Mysterio and like all these characters. It's basically Spider-Man taking him down, and then after that, it's like that's when the movie begins.
Yeah.
So it would have been a very short sequence, but it would have been a fun sequence for sure.
I like this. I would totally watch this movie.
So yeah, on January 11th, 2010, Sony announced that they would be rebooting the Spider-Man franchise after the withdrawal of Sam Raimi. His reasoning behind the departure has to do with the constant rewrites, stating that he hated the 4 drafts that were written, and there was no way that he could meet the May 2011 deadline. A quote from Sam Raimi looking back on when he left, quote, "It really was the most undramatic of breakups. It was simply that we had a deadline and we couldn't get the story to work on a level that I wanted it to work. I was very unhappy with Spider-Man 3, and I wanted to make Spider-Man 4 to end on a high note, the best Spider-Man of all of them. But I couldn't get the script together in time. Due to my own failings, I said to Sony, I don't want to make a movie that's less than great, so I think I shouldn't make this picture. Go ahead with your reboot, which you've been planning on anyways."
It's like kind of sad because it was not Sam Raimi's fault for Spider-Man 3.
No.
What happened with Spider-Man 3 is absolutely not his fault. And yet, I feel like he got so much blame for that movie and was like basically put in director jail after it came out, which really stinks because like he's a super talented filmmaker, but because of the stink of Spider-Man 3, he didn't really get a chance to direct much. You know, he did Drag Me to Hell.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it was like stuff like Oz the Great and Powerful. The only movie he's done since Oz the Great and Powerful was Multiverse of Madness, which is really unfortunate that it's like he has not really had the chance to like do weird, fun Sam Raimi stuff.
Yeah. Although I will say that Drag Me to Hell is the most Sam Raimi movie of all time.
Yes. Drag Me to Hell is a lot of fun.
I think with that movie, that's PG-13? I didn't realize that. I thought that was an R-rated movie. It feels like an R-rated movie. It should be. Drag Me to Hell was one of those movies where when I watched it, I was like, yes, this is Sam Raimi returning to his roots.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite films that he's ever done. And I guess had he not left, he probably would have never made it.
Yeah.
So yeah, Amy Pascal then said to Sam Raimi, "Thank you for not wasting the studio's money, and I appreciate your candor." So we left on the best of terms. Both of us were trying to do the best things for the fans and the good name of Spider-Man and Sony Studios. This will conclude the first part of The Curse of Spider-Man. Sorry again that this episode has taken so long to make. There was a lot of research involved, and there was so much that I wanted to include in the episode. Join us next week when we discuss Spider-Man after Sam Raimi and how Sony continues to hold on to the property. If you would like to see what we are talking about, be sure to follow us on Instagram at HowDidThisNotGetMade and on the platform formerly known as Twitter at HDTNGM. If you would like to support this show and Pipe Dream Podcast, be sure to join our Patreon at patreon.com/PipeDreamPodcast. If you have any suggestions for future episodes or corrections from past episodes, be sure to submit them to notgetmade@gmail.com. Be sure to join us for part 2 of The Curse of Spider-Man, and thank you for listening.